autumn talks, I suppose, after a very, very short break for the summer. This is actually one of the many starts of the Lymington Afloat project as well, where we have the exhibition starting next Saturday, the Lymington Afloat weekend, festival weekend, which will be the last weekend in September, and there's a little brochure here. Everyone who lives in Lymington will be getting one of these through their letterbox very shortly, but we have a few copies outside if you would like them. And just while I'm here, I will just mention what the next talk is, which is on the 4th of October, and it's the RNLI 200 Years of Saving Lives at Sea by Steve Billett. So, on to this evening, and the Star Act. This evening is very exciting start for us because quite a lot of the whole project around Lymington Afloat has really been helped and supported in every possible way by Berthon. And so we're very, very pleased to have Brian May and Keith Longman from Berthon here to give the first talk. So if you'd like to welcome them to the stage, everybody.
Good evening. Many of you will know that my brother Dominic and I own and run Berthon, which has been operating continuously since 1877, nearly 150 years. Berthon's revenue takes us into the top 25 in the UK maritime and marine industry. You may well be thinking that I'll be providing you with a great stream of facts and figures about famous boats and clients associated with our company. And whilst those things are important, of course, what I want to share with you tonight is something different. It's really the story of a family enterprise which has grown and expanded with influence and presence across the world. But today, Berthon owes its philosophy and staying power to the values and sound business sense of not one but two siblings, Harry Goodland May and his younger brother, George Oliver, born in 1873 and 1876, respectively. While we've got the picture on here, have a look at Harry May, dressed in on the left-hand side of the right-hand photo. And you'll see that they've got shoes on, which are leather shoes, and they're going sailing. George emigrated to America in 1897, whereupon he set about changing the world. His fame and influence is still legendary in his profession 127 years later. Meanwhile, his elder brother, Harry, started out as a small businessman, selling clothing to Edwardian Exeter folk, Exonians, but soon fell in love with sailing and small craft racing, thereby drastically changing direction, selling up and heading off to London to become a builder of boats. The May family came to the small coastal town of Teignmouth in Devon in the person of Benjamin Oliver May, Harry's grandfather and my great-great-great-grandfather around 1841. He'd grown up in Lyme Regis, where his family were devout Methodists and small shop owners, grocers by trade. At some point, there seems to have been a serious falling out because his son, George England May, abandoned the Methodists to take up with the Anglican at a rival church. The shocking effect of such a small community was hard to imagine. He and his father owned different shops, and his grocery business was now selling alcohol, which presumably would have been flown in the face of his father's deeply held beliefs. Meanwhile, his own children were growing up. One son, my great-great-uncle George, who went to America and did extremely well academically, gaining a scholarship to Blundell's, by far the best public school in the southwest, where he was inspired by a brilliant mathematician. In due course, both brothers gravitated to Exeter, George to study chartered accountancy as an articled pupil, akin to an apprenticeship, where he gained brilliant results in the national examinations. Harry eventually bought a hosiery business in Exeter High Street, where he learned how to market, advertise, promote products, and think on his feet. Meanwhile, George went up to London as a practicing chartered accountant, from whence he sailed in 1897 to the United States take up a post in the offices of Price Waterhouse in New York. Harry seems to have had the sea in his blood. He quickly became one of the leading lights of the Exeter Rowing Club, first as an active racing member and then as Honourable Secretary, organising everything. Around 1903, his name began to appear in the sailing regatta listings. Soon he burst upon the scene in the west of England on using the 14-foot dinghies and the 18-foot jolly boats. Pretty soon he was almost unbeatable. At the same time, he'd begun a very close collaboration with Frank Morgan Giles, a budding yacht designer who had grown up in Shaldon just across the river from Teignmouth and who had also briefly attended Brundall's. In 1903, Frank had headed down up to London, where, according to tradition, he set up a boatyard under Hammersmith Bridge. In the Edwardian era, there was a freedom from restrictions and a yes we can attitude in those with an entrepreneurial spirit. If you wanted to take up ballooning or motoring or sail around the world, you could just do it. While Harry was growing up in Devon, all around the coast, rowing and sailing clubs were being founded, along with regattas. These new clubs and the annual West of England conferences were where Harry May began to find his feet and then find his voice. Over a handful of years, his contribution became increasingly frequent and increasingly important. Soon, everybody knew him not only as one of the finest small boat sailors in the area, but as a man with an analytical and organisational talents. This is where I'd like to share with you the first of the view of the May family treasures, which have come down to us from those from far-off days in the Edwardian time. Frank Morgan Giles was a prime mover in the setting up and the first of the national and later international dinghy class, 14 dinghy class, which today has 14 active fleets in the UK, Australia, Canada, USA, Italy, Switzerland, Japan and France. Today's carbon fibre machines with their twin trapezes, spinnakers, hydrofoils on rudders, and we see today the origins of the wooden boats crafted in Shaldon by Abraham Pengelly, where Morgan Giles served his apprenticeship. Harry May took care to collect photographs for the small racing, and we can see those in the current picture. We don't have time to hear about the stories of the owners and their dinghies, but it was because of these boats and these events that the May family began its enduring relationships with building, buying, selling, repairing, servicing seagoing craft of all sizes for all. The important thing about these local dinghies was that people could afford them at a time when sport of yacht racing per se had usually been associated with very rich, mostly male owners and very large, expensive yachts racing from the early 1820s. For Harry May, champion of those modest means, this was the start of everything. Inevitably, he was yearning for greater challenges. He was almost certainly bored, running his hosiery business in Exeter High Street with its New Year sales, its regular promotions and specified, patented, bifurcated shirts where the tails could tuck down each trouser leg, never rucking up, or even varieties of Macintosh, or the complete provision of warm clothing for motorists. Selling underwear or embroidered handkerchiefs to the middle classes was not that exciting. Harry was now married and he had produced 2 children. Perhaps the decision to spend his free time becoming the most feared racer of 18-foot jolly boats along the coast was driven by a need for personal space which he found out on the water. His nickname at this time was Terror, a man who terrified his opponents. Being wiry and slight compared to many of the other local sailors, including Frank Morgan Giles, gave him an added advantage. But it was his will to win which brought him so many triumphs and trophies to the southwest. In this picture here, we see a dinghy that would have taken down the train, come down from London, picked up at the local regatta station, taken to sea, port, bay or bay, by cart and horse. Harry is standing top on the right, very thin, but always absolutely perfectly put forward. Frank's girlfriend, Ivy, wrote a description of Harry in her journal, which brings that character to life. On one occasion, a Plymouth man had been bragging about not being afraid of the dreadful weather. He took him on. The wind was so appalling that his mouthy Revival's dinghy carried away her mast before even reaching the end of the breakwater. Harry then defiantly steered his boat 3 times around the course with a double-reefed lug and Spitfire jib. People marvelled that he kept it afloat at all. Ivy described what he looked like when he was disembarked. And I quote, "A more abject, shivering, wringing specimen of humanity when he came ashore I never saw. His hands were raw with the sheets and he looked simply dead, but he didn't care. He had done it, and a fine thing it was to do too. There's some pluck in a man that would do that." Harry May was not a man to cross swords with, especially if you did not stomach a fierce fight, as Frank Morden-Giles was to find out later to his cost. At the end of 1908, Harry sold his shop, lock, stock and barrel, and goodwill, and set off to London to become a builder of boats. There was every chance of the new enterprise would do brilliantly. In 1906, an international conference involving representatives from all over Europe created a new range of development classes, the 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 15, 19 and 23 metres. The best known are still alive. The 6 metres, the 8 metres and the 12 metre classes. Designers were required to work within an equation where if one measurement, such as girth or sail area, was increased, adjustments had to be made to other elements of the formula. The metre designation did not refer to actual length, but to overall dimensions compared to other classes in the series. It was an inspirational scheme which ensured that those people with money enough to build and transport such boats could compete bespoke sailing yachts on equal terms, not just in home waters, but also in many other countries. It would be possible to set up large international regattas, and it was also a massive commercial opportunity for yacht builders and designers, with so many commissions up for grab, and the possibility of European and British clients. Harry and Frank were primed and ready to make the most of this magnificent opportunity. The new business of Morgan, Giles and May, naval architects, opened its doors in 1909. Suddenly, large, attention-grabbing pages appeared in the yachting press, in particular the Yachtsman magazine, showcasing their agency's extensive range of class for sale. The firm's offices were now listed at the much more prestigious Dudley House on the Strand, and money had been pumped into the existing business venture, mostly of the major investment coming from Harry's shop sale and his now wealthy accountant brother, George Oliver May, the first senior partner of Price Waterhouse in the USA. Incidentally, he invented depreciation. Frank was already famous because his winning designs were a regular feature in the pages of Yachting Monthly. At the same time, Harry's reported attributes were being watered down. He was simply described as well known in the west of England, with an interest in yacht clubs. This was hardly the whole truth. He'd been driving force of the development of small boat racing in the west of England and Conference waters. However, as a man born into a family of Teignmouth shopkeepers, he seems to have been regarded as a minor partner in the Morgan, Giles and May by the journalists. In 1916, in his 1916 application to become a member of the Institute of Naval Architects, Frank declared that he had been senior partner and managing director of Morgan, Giles and May. This appears to have been ambiguous, which was to fester beneath the surface. With the Mays having provided most of the injection of capital, Harry might not have seen it that way. And here we've got an example of the Morgan, Giles and May boats going from bottom right, 5 tonne, 9 tonne, 10 tonne, 15 tonne, all the way up to 20, 30, 40, 50, 100, 120 and 150 tonnes, and they were selling boats like that. It just took off. As the new racing boats of the international metre rule took off, Brother George May commissioned 2 6-meters from America in 1910 and 1911, which Harry and Frank raced for him. Other orders followed from famous names like Algernon Maudslay and R.T. Dixon, the top 6-meter international sailors of their day. Alongside design and build services, the firm ran an extensive yacht brokerage, as well as meeting all the maintenance and repair needs of their existing clients. At the end of December 1911, Morgan, Giles and May moved their business to Hythe on the Southampton Water. Around this time, they were also working on an order of several 22-foot hydroplanes for the Royal Motor Yacht Club. The skill and craftsmanship in their builds was famous. And in the next couple of years, their meter boats were winning the biggest prizes. Then something went badly wrong. In early 1914, lawyers were exchanging letters already. The relationship between Frank Morgan Giles and Harry May had broken down irretrievably. It was terribly low. There was terrible row. Frank was no longer welcome to set a foot in the shipyard. Money could not be accounted for and must be repaid. 2 outstanding designs would be forwarded onto his address. By April, Yachting Monthly had published a terse notice confirming the split and that Harry May was to carry on the business at Hythe under a different name. The next few years were rather troubled, not just because of the war, which had Harry building wooden laminated motorbike eggshell sidecars, rather usefully used to send messages and orders along the front line, i.e. the trenches. Harry had bought Frank out and created a new firm, May, Harden and May, in the same position. Initially, there was an expansion of the Hythe premises and the equipment, but by 1916, there was another takeover in process. This time, it was Harry selling out, although remaining as managing director. But by 1918, there were yet more lawyers writing letters as a bitter case ended up in court. May, Harden and May was taken over by Mr. Holt Thomas's aircraft manufacturing company, later to become British Aircraft Corporation, and Harry appointed to the board, and he was in charge at Hythe. An earlier design for a flying boat described as the forerunner of the big aeroplanes and seaplanes had necessitated large premises. Hence, Harry was also building the Felixstowe seaplanes. The prosecuting lawyers argued that Harry had been often absent, certainly not sailing during the war, and a poor manager, and that he had spent substantial company funds restoring the old house in which he'd lived. Harry didn't back down one jot, retorting that he had devoted more zeal and attention to organising and supervision to the business than when he owned it, and he had not even taken his holidays. The house in question had been dangerous with rotting beams. You should have paid someone to danger money to live in it. Much of the material used had been cut off from Admiralty contracts, which would otherwise have been put into firewood. Oh dear. But Harry was very resilient, and with the assistance of his younger brother, Frank, he looked around for a suitable place to buy and establish the family's new business. Frank had been wounded in the trenches and was invalided out, minus an arm and with a shattered kneecap. But it's typical of a public relations expert, like Harry's genius, that they purchased one of the most famous trademarks in the small boat building area, that of the Berthon Boat Company Limited, belonging to Edward Pearson, the Reverend's son, having just died, which had been already an international house name. As ever, Frank was a nominee. This is not Frank Morgan Giles anymore. The brother Frank was a nominee for the American resident brother George. The Reverend Berthon, who invented the world's famous collapsible Berthon boat, had also himself been an expert, getting his little craft featured in the newspapers of the Victorian times. On one occasion, both journalists and international dignitaries were summoned to watch bridges being constructed by joining several Berthon boats together, which proved before their very eyes of being able to support many men, a wagon and then cart horses, even after a large hole had been cut in one of the boats, i.e. an early form of Bailey bridges. The smaller, 7-foot collapsible portable craft could be carried under a man's arm and had been used by naval and military units all over the world, and everybody had heard of them. You'll be able to see a couple at the Lymington Afloat exhibition next week. The larger 9-foot one had lingered in that I have lent to the museum, had lingered in the rafters of a wooden hotel in Norway that had been condemned, and the other I had bought from a museum liquidation auction in Scotland. Berthon studied medicine in Liverpool and Dublin, but after his marriage in 1834, he gave up his intention of becoming a doctor and travelled around the continent for 6 years. Keenly interested from boyhood in mechanical science, he made experiments in the application of a screw propeller for boats, but his model, with a 2-bladed propeller, was ridiculed when it was placed in front of the British Admiralty. Berthon therefore did not complete the patent, and the idea was left for Francis Smith to bring it out more successfully 4 years later, in 1838. In 1841, he entered Magdalen College, Cambridge, in order to study for the church. There he produced what is usually known as the Berthon's log, in which the suction produced by the water streaming past the end of a pipe projected below a ship is registered on a mercury column above. In 1845, he was ordained, and after holding a curacy in Lymington, he was given a living at Fareham. Yes, what an interesting coincidence. He then designed some instruments to indicate the trim and rolling of boats at sea, but the idea for which he is chiefly remembered was that of the Berthon folding boat. In 1873, encouraged by Samuel Plimsoll of the Plimsoll line, encouraged the Reverend to perfect his collapsible boat. It hadn't been selling particularly well. Success was at last achieved, and in less than a year he'd received orders from the Admiralty for boats to the amount of £15,000, the equivalent today of 2.2 million. That would have finally had his business meaningful, making his business meaningful. Some were then taken by Sir George Neris to the Arctic, others were sent to General Gordon at Khartoum, and others were sent to Zambezi by Frederick Selous. In 1910, huge batches were sent to Paris during the floods. These are French postcards, a set that I found in an auction in Germany. And you'll note in the top left-hand corner one here is Notre Dame, which they're rebuilding. The Reverend also used his shipwrights and apprentices to rebuild the roof of Rumsey Abbey. After all, a church roof is built as a ship's hull would have been, albeit upside down. The church was probably delighted that their asset had been fixed so well, whereas Harry's restorations in the company house in Hythe was used against him. It was only after the Titanic disaster that the Berthon boats were finally put on board passenger vessels. That's some 50, 60 years after they were designed to be safety vessels. The crew having gone on strike and insisting that there were enough Berthon boats put on board to save their lives. Not the passengers. Still not the passengers. I suppose that's capitalism. And now we come to, in August 1918, the Wessex Gazette reported that the shipyard Lymington Hants has been taken over by Berthon Boat Company of Rumsey, who have acquired a wharf higher up the river. Tugs, drifters and cargo vessels up to 800 tons are to be built in the future. Just before I finish this bit here, if you look at the top of the picture there, you can see the grass area, which is adjacent to St Catherine's Road. And that Catherine's Road is part of the dowry that was given by Catherine Parr to Henry VIII. And then that would have been built on just after World War II. Several of these craft are already in frame, whilst a new system of wood construction was to be adopted. Quite a lot of that was lamination. The site Harry purchased had been formerly and famously owned by the great Thomas Inman, ex-boat builder from Hastings, whose Alarm and Arrow took part in the iconic Royal Yacht Squadron 100 Guineas round the island race in 1851, won by the schooner America, thus became known as the America's Cup. I should probably point out, for those of you who aren't sailors, that the 37th America's Cup is taking place in Barcelona this week, where the challengers are fighting to become the challenger, which for the finals, which occur in early October. I'm rather lucky because I'm supposed to be on Shamrock 5, which is the only J-class boat, America's Cup racing boat, and it's a wooden one, it's the only wooden one there, racing against a few other J-class boats. Yes, it can be a tough life running a boat business, but we also have to find our future customers. I always had a small black book, forever making notes of who I'd met and then vigorously follow up in due course. Nowadays, we just use our phones. Going back a little bit, there's been boat building in Lymington, some claim since Roman times, but there is documentation that 9 ships of the Whelm were built on our river for Edward I at the end of the 13th century. You'll be pleased to hear that Portsmouth only managed 2 ships. The salt trade here was mentioned in the Domesday Book, already exporting shiploads from Lymington and also, of course, bringing coal back in. Ships always need boatyards, and the one in Lymington was sold to shipbuilder John Coombs in 1699, most likely to have been Finder's Dock, which you can see just at the bottom here. That's just down a bit more there, which is right at the bottom of Nelson Place, and the Salton is right next door, which is where the Berthon site is. So it definitely goes back. And that was a plan from 1640, adjacent to a Salton that was Inman's shipyard, and that's where Berthon. Thomas Inman was patronised by wealthy men, the first being Joseph Weld, who was born and died at Pilewell, across the river. Inman built Lulworth there, and then started the Inman boatyard, or shipyard, on the western shore of the Lymington River, where the Arrow was later built for Thomas Chamberlain in 1821. Plenty of boats were built in between that, but Weld's second boat was the Alarm, built in 1830. Thomas Inman built and launched many yachts, large and small, from 1821 until he retired in 1846, leaving his firm in the hands of his sons and eventually his grandson. And from 1850 onwards, Lymington is said to have been the most important yacht building centre in the country. The largest boat built was a 120-ton Fortuna at 130 feet, built for Sir Adrian Hope in the rounded shed that you can see in this picture, this watercolour. The rounded shed that was built specifically in 1876, and then the boat was launched in 1877 from that shed. The Fortuna dock is where the yacht sat in the mudflats to the south of Berthon over the winter, hence the name given to the Lymington Harbour Commissioner's dock there today. Also, the pub on the corner of the cobbles was called the Fortuna at one point, as also was called the Alarm beforehand. Obviously, because every time they got paid their money, each week they went straight to the pub. When Thomas Inman's grandson died at the turn of the century, the yard was sold and passed through various hands until 1918, when Harry May took it on. There are still various Inman descendants in the New Forest, one of whom I bumped into at our music on the marina 2 weeks ago. When his new pride and joy, the Lymington shipyard, had been previously put up from the auction back in 1901, the particulars listed 28 acres, not inclusive of valuable foreshore and mudlands, with a water frontage of 3,650 feet, and fully equipped with all necessary building and repairing shops, slipways and land stages for carrying on with large businesses. Today, we only have 18 acres, which includes the Flushford oozy mud area, where our marina now sits. Although Harry never used the oozy mud, his grandson, David May, did, and thereby proving the particulars 60 years previously. As early as 1920, the indications were superb. Bear with me while I read a small part of a list that appeared in the press in 1920, because it gives an impression of how busy the site really was. The photo shows a 500-ton wood coaster being launched and worked on, and you should be able to just about see there's a ladder that's being held over the side of the boat, and it's sitting on the slipway still. Work was also going on with a 60-ton fishing smack, an 85-ton twin screw motor yacht was also being fitted out by the joiners. 80-ton steam yacht Sheila was similarly in hand, and 16 others. The yard was booming. In the roaring 20s, where mass-produced cars started, the discovery of penicillin occurred, silent movies moved on to talking movies, manufacturing booms. All this allowed Harry to join the inventors and credited with creating alternative classes to the YRA meter boats, which had become far too expensive for the average yachtsman's pocket. One journalist wrote, "It has been left to the enterprise of a private firm to make a start in that direction, and the firm in question has met with considerable success in their efforts." That firm being Berthon. I'll start with the scows. Those efforts involved producing Lymington scows, a smart little sailing boat, very well built with a good turn of speed, very stiff and light, enough to be carried on the deck of a small cruising yacht. Apparently, it was the adoption of quality production methods which resulted in a very modest price, so many were sold, both in the UK and in other countries. But Harry had also taken things a step further. The firm also supplied knock-down sets of materials so that any amateur handy with tools can build the boats themselves by a system of standardization. Every plank and every piece of timber is accurately finished in jigs, to the jigs in the machine shop, and therefore are exactly like in every respect. By World War II, Berthon had built 200 scows. Here are some racing at high tide on the water of the river. Harry's extremely successful innovation from the Berthon stable was then, in 1923, was the West Solent class, to provide a similar length sailing yachts as the 6-metre class bespoke high-price boats. Again, he was widening the market. A report in Country Life in June 1924 waxed lyrical. The headquarters of the class are at Lymington, where the yachts are built by the Berthon Boat Company from the design of Mr. L.A. Jacobs. The boats, about 6 tons, actually they were only 4.5, are of very similar type to the old Solent One design class, which had had a successful career in the late 90s and early years of the century. Measuring 34 feet overall, 23 on the waterline, and they're slightly smaller, but appear to be as fast. They are of one design only so far as the hull is concerned. The rig is optional as long as the total sail area does exceed 570 square metres. The first 5 were completed for £500, but owing to an advance in wages, it's expected that the future yachts will cost a few pounds more. Obviously got a few bit of inflation going on there. For the man of moderate means, these new one design boats should be ideal. Having cabin accommodation, it's possible for 2 persons or even 3 at a pitch to live on board during the season, which would make for economy. The West Solents were so successful that the largest and richest club in the land, the Royal Thames Yacht Club, provided a special trophy for them in the 1930s. Known as the Corey Cup, it was competed for by 3 separate fleets of West Solents, one from the East Coast, one from the Solent, and a third from Torbay. Small wonder that at the Lord Mayor's dinner for the Lymington Council members in October 27, the Borough Treasurer gave a speech citing the success of the Berthon Boat Company, along with the town's thriving yacht club, as an indicator that the town was forging ahead, and Berthon had left the days of the Lymington shipyard bankruptcy far behind. After all, the first 5 boats were bought by the Royal Lymington Yacht Club, and Harry had also a second batch contract for 5 more boats that were sent to the Argentino Yacht Club, one of which has recently been restored and winning many regattas on the western coast of America. That picture there was one of the syndicate owners who had visited Berthon to see my West Solent 1 design, which I bought in 2013 to teach the apprentices what to do. Unfortunately, we got quite far, and then suddenly we got a brilliant amount of woodwork, and so it's been sitting in the shed. It's a hospital job, we call it. However, in the meantime, this syndicate was put together, and you can see that it was been winning races in the Classic Week. My boat is named Ripple, suggested by my son, Oliver, who first, because the original name was Dina, and very unfortunately was raped by Jacob's sons, and I rather didn't think it was the right name to have for a boat. So Oliver fully understood the reason why I'd bought the boat, to teach our apprentices traditional skills in wood, not forgetting as well learning steel, aluminium, FRP and GRP, and of course the modern fibres such as Kevlar, carbon, etc. It's the ripple in the pond that flows down the generations, not only the May family, but also via the constant apprentices that have kept the company and jobs for many other local members, families for so long. These West Solent restricted class boats were still being built during the 10 years of the Depression that manifested itself across the Western industrial world from 1929, when only 5 boats were delivered at Berthon, the first being a yacht ordered in 1928 before the hiatus, and then only 4 small boats. So here we have in the 20s, it was huge big boats going on, and there was over 20 boats in the boatyard, and now in 2029 there's only 5 boats. However, in addition, the new blacksmith shop is given a build number, which shows the classic use of craftsmanship during recessions. As a family business, this continues today, with our dredging equipment having annual maintenance during the summer months when demand is less. However, it was in 1933 when my great-grandfather Harry asked the naval architect Rodney Poole to provide a design based upon a brief for a potential order. The concept was to be a sea-kindly craft, moderate overhangs with a draft, a fairly heavy displacement, and an easily handled sail plan, adept to comfortably carry 4 or 5 people. A boat with good auxiliary power, capable of running through foul tides, suitable for both cruising and offshore racing under the recently RORC, Royal Ocean Racing Club, rating rules. To my great-grandfather's immense irritation, his client, Mr. Burge, had second thoughts after inspecting the design and approached a rival shipyard in the West Country to request an alternative design based upon the exact same requirements. Having compared the 2 designs, Mr. Burge commissioned the other shipyard, Phillips of Dartmouth, to build his dream boat. Berthon legend has it that the original of the class name Gauntlet was Harry's response to his commercial setback. Frustrated and totally sure that his design was superior, in his words, he threw down the gauntlet and Berthon built his design. Once Gauntlet was afloat, he challenged Mr. Burge to a race. His confidence in the Gauntlet, 36 feet long, 30 feet on the waterline and 12 tons, with her canoe stern, which is what the Mr. Burge didn't like, was sturdy build, was fully vindicated when she proved considerably faster, and she became the first of a production of line series of various size gauntlets to be built at Berthon. And so the Gauntlet legend was born, with a starting price of 1,000 guineas, which is £1,050, 900, which now in today's money would be £95,000, which actually you might be able to buy a second-hand 36 sailing boat, not a brand new one. The challenge, work and time had paid off, not just personally but commercially, with 26 gauntlets built before the war. Sizes range from an 8-ton, pertinently named mitten, being a small glove, and the glove being the gauntlet, by Harry with a touch of humour before selling her to the Honourable Clive Pearson after Cowes Week. And it goes up to the 26-ton flagship of the fleet. Harry had now moved up the scale as dinghy racing became yacht racing, not super yacht, and he carried out his passion and enthusiasm for the sport. He always endeavoured to take a gauntlet to Cowes Week. He was a very disappointed man if he returned from Cowes still owning her. The planking was originally pitch pine, grown on grown oak flames. Fastenings were all copper and brass with chain plates, and deck fittings were a gunmetal, no doubt to reduce corrosion. The addition of an aft galley with Taylor's paraffin cooker and Electrolux refrigerator provided some comfort when cruising, and a forward patented toilet was also popular, particularly amongst seafaring women. However, one early summer, a prospective buyer applied so much pressure to Harry to purchase Harry's boat for the upcoming regatta in Cowes. He was forced to sell it, and shortly before the launch, for a decent premium, of course. So he gave in, got a decent premium. This might have been a disaster for the Cowes veteran had it not been for the unsung exceptional efforts at Berthon Shipwright team, who managed to build another gauntlet in time for Cowes Week. And I'm certain you know that what name's next. The craftsman finished the boat. Harry beat the recent demanding client with ease, and a new large bespoke brand of various size yachts saw the company through the second half of the Depression as war loomed. Then the war arrived. During the war years, leisure boating was forbidden, with all leisure boats laid up, with engines removed for the war effort, and the skilled craftsmen at Berthon were put to work building various craft for the war effort. 45 60 to 72 HTMLs, those harbour master vessels, and MTBs, motor torpedo boats, 122 smaller vessels such as landing crafts, motorboats, and a bunch of fishing vessels for undercover work in the Mediterranean and the Caribbean. The company received contracts for 224 vessels, of which 49 were cancelled as the war was ended. But Harry must have been in his element, taking orders from the MOD for patches of boats and builds, for batches of builds of up to 30 in one contract. And it came out to be an average of 35 boats between 25 foot and 75 foot built annually during the war. Interestingly, many of the large motorboat launches were towed away to be finished in small creeks across the south coast, where the local landlubber carpenters and engineer craftsmen fitting the interiors. Not only did this speed up the process, but it also reduced the risk of fully built vessels being bombed at Berthon. The German bombers focused on large ports such as Southampton or Portsmouth, but if they failed to use all their bombs, these were safe to drop on smaller ports as the bombers make their wide turn, whether they went west or east, to face towards home. Seaforth House, still standing at Berthon, was hit, and the shipyard house had suffered shrapnel as a bomb landed in the mudflats adjacent to the railway south of the bridge at low tide. During the war, the shipwrights and other Berthon craftsmen doubled up as firefighters. If anybody knows any of those names there, come and have a chat later if you want the picture. I'm now getting close to the generations that are in our time. Major Martineau, MC, Royal Cruising Club, and Commodore of the Royal Lymington Yacht Club, 1954. He was the first to order a gauntlet or any boat after the war. Saluki was 14 ton, launched in 1946, and it was the first of the last 12 new gauntlets. Harry had cleverly persuaded him to take a 14 ton gauntlet because none were built before the war. The same year, Harry had long considered to be betrayed, but he was invited to join the Royal Lymington Yacht Club just as his health was failing. This was either because of his contribution to the war effort, or maybe that class differences had diminished as a result of the war. Maybe both. Either way, my father was also great friends with the Major, and I remember visiting him later in Platoff House near the Chequers pub. And it's likely that it was he, the Major, who broke the chain. Harry probably loved visiting the Royal Lymington Yacht Club without being invited. He certainly deserved his mentorship. Harry, nicknamed for many years as Puffer for his chain-smoking habit, died in 1952 at the ripe old age of 79, despite lighting cigarette to cigarette. Meanwhile, gauntlets continued to be cruised, loved, repaired, restored, and above all admired as the first production class of large leisure sailing boats on the planet. John Oliver May, Harry May's son, preferred banking, becoming a director of a merchant bank called Guinness Mahon. So the Lymington shipyard was passed on to Harry's grandson, my father, David, who took over in 1958, but only received the business in 1960 as George May was nearing the end of his life, still alive in America. As an accountant, he suggested a wedding gift to alleviate inheritance tax. Hence, my father married Baroness Katrien van den Branden de Reet, who came over to England after the war. She was from Belgium. After nigh on a decade, with General Manager Mr. Chew in charge, who focused more on commercial vessels, such as 3 times 40-foot pilot service launches built for British Tankers Company, now BP, 300-foot inshore minesweepers, composite built for the Academy, 6 42 storing tenders for the fleet craft, again for the Admiralty, and a 30-foot towing launch for Sir R. McAlpine and Sons. Again, it's not just about leisure, it's about commercial and defence. David uses his naval architect knowledge and in 1958 initiated the build of 14 Finn-class Olympic sailing dinghies, his being named Finnegan's Wake. The OKs came next. Like Harry, he had started with dinghies, building with Finns and OKs in batches for locals and himself. The photos show the OK dinghy built by the Berthon Coat Company for Olympic helmsman Richard Craosborn, and David is in the Finn. During the mid-60s, building batches of wooden dinghies were ceased as GRP hulls on production lines take over worldwide. The most important great step forward was during the regatta in the USA, where boats were moored in marinas. David returned to the UK with a mission which ended up as Lymington Marina Limited, opened in 1965 and completed before 1970. It was one of 2 of the first marinas in the UK. The Earl Mountbatten was invited to officially open it in 1968, and I shall read you parts of his speech. My lords, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. May has admitted that there is an American influence in his development. He almost said it apologetically, but can we be wrong in following the lead of another nation who have more developed experience in this field than we have in England? Some of the fringes available here, plug-in telephone at individual pontoon berths, an ice-making machine, and even Carmen hair-curling rollers that can be rented, may be regarded initially as gimmicks, but I'm sure that they'll soon become part of the generally accepted marina scene. And we still have hairdressers, hair dryers in our washrooms. Mountbatten carries on. Mr. May has rather light-heartedly mentioned the difficulties he experienced in the early stages and the 10 years of preparation and groundwork which has resulted in this development. I would venture to suggest that some older and less progressive managing directors would have found the frustrations sufficiently wearing to give up the struggle. I quote again from his experiences. Months and months to obtain the outline planning permission, and then only after Sherlock Holmes measures had been applied. British Railways lost the trolleys. The GPO office lost the overalls. British Road Services lost the fittings for the toilet block. The customs at London Airport lost the electrical fittings. What hope has our unfortunate company got of making a financial recovery in the face of such terrifying examples of incompetence and indifference? And he finishes off. But there are encouraging signs of efficiency, competence and enthusiasm, for without these, Mr. May and his company would never have risen above these appalling setbacks and nevertheless have completed the marina to schedule. Mr. May has mentioned that my wife's... No, sorry, he hasn't quite finished yet. Mr. May has mentioned that my wife's father and grandfather had a real interest in the Berthon Boat Company. This was because the Reverend Berthon, who invented the original collapsible boat, was the vicar of Rumsey, the vicar of Rumsey Abbey, and their personal friend. I have had personal experience of Berthon boats, for we carried 2 of them on board the anti-submarine escort HMS P-31 when I was her first lieutenant and second in command in 1918 during World War I. We would never have had room to carry boats of this size if they hadn't been collapsible, and very good were they too. If anybody wants to read the whole of the speech, you can find it simply just by Googling Berthon history. By the 70s and beyond, the mix of commercial pilot boats for Middle East, RNLI lifeboats for the UK, and leisure motorboats up to 70 feet with twin engines, sailboats and racing cruisers, it all repeats itself. David was an enthusiast and a skilled yachtsman, participant in club regattas. Berthon built a series of winning yachts for him. The most successful was one of the 2 Nicholson 43 hulls, fitted out by Berthon, winning almost every silver cup that the Solent yacht clubs could offer that year. I actually recall my mother employing an extra silver cleaner, because in those days the winner literally held the cups until the prize giving the following year, and they had to be cleaned every week. Others were from the other boats that he turned out for, built and successful were Ron Holland, designed by Ron Holland, who had arrived from New Zealand in his own small boat. Excuse me for a second. And designed the 1-tonner Winsome Blue. The hull in aluminium, built in Florida and fitted out in Lymington. The photo shows David on the stern, on the helm, and actually me, 16-year-old, on the coach roof, ready to pull up the kite, pull down the kite. Later, Ed Dubois designed us a 2-tonner Winsome Gold in 1979. Again, aluminium hulls and not built in Florida, but built in Holland. David's period at the helm for 30 years, apart from building one of the first two marinas in the UK, he also brought Hood Sails to Berthon, the first American sail company to venture overseas. Many more jobs were available for locals. He was also the first to purchase a straddle hoist for lifting yachts under 16 tons from the water, again bringing in American ideas. That soon increased to 40 tons, and the slipways in the boatyard were fast being piled to provide more land and frontage, and working on boats close to the workshops. Furthermore, the first spray paint boat in the UK was built at Berthon for winsome gold, so that my father could have the same colour, metallic colour, of his Aston Martin. And that was the first metallic that used on sailing boats. Berthon had moved on from building bespoke hulls in wood during the 1970s, the largest being Environist, a 70-foot design, CSD design, research vessel for J.S. Seeger Limited. The boat was then sold on by Berthon to the then Australian chief executive of Imperial Tobacco as a tender for his race boat. We then sold her to Pete Townsend of the Who band. So there's a little bit of showing off. Berthon switched to fitting out hulls, manufactured by various UK moulders, delivered to Lymington on the back of a lorry. We had a new line of 9 Fisher 46s and other smaller boats in the late 70s. And then we finned up with a hull that was built again by Halmatic, 70-foot auxiliary ketch, Camper and Nicholson. And we fitted it out for Bob Miller, who was the joint owner of duty-free shops worldwide, and went along to have a lot of rather large maxi boats. I cannot list everything that Berthon did, but the link between generations keeps coming up. And in this case, it's the aluminium hull built for Lord Robert Iliffe's 80-foot motor yacht called Dalvina, which started in late 1988. His father had already commissioned the 17-ton gauntlet Syrinx back in 1936. The head count at Berthon in 1990 was about 100, finishing off Robert Iliffe's 80-foot Dalvina, and also there was Drumbeat, Sir Max Aitken's old boat. And the interior was suspended on an aluminium frame to reduce vibration. Funny enough, he asked, this is Robert Iliffe, he asked if he could buy Berthon from David, but he declined. The family, the Iliffe family, has now got the largest marina company in the UK, MDL, and we still are friends. Right. You've heard Berthon eschewed building sticky hulls, but nonetheless training shipwright apprentices to be able to service and repair the new fibre hulls and superstructures continued. Building one-off boats under 20 metres came to an end as certain brands manifested themselves at the head of the markets. Manufacturing boats on construction lines and minimal options for interior just won the day. Thank goodness, though, that the UK are still leaders with Princess and Sunseeker, as well as Oyster blue water sailing boats. The marine cluster in southern England means that there are a number of suppliers of parts being kept afloat. Very important. In the mid-1880s, my brother Dominic and I were both working in the city. He in the life markets, and me as a wealth and small company fund manager. We both ended up at Berthon in the early 1990s. I was seeking a new job in the city. I happened to be in America team racing for the Royal Thames Yacht Club and racing with Peter Nicholson. Yep, my father's best friend, fellow naval architect, and he taught me how to win races in the Solent over a 5-year period. When my father And I was in America with him when my father called me from Lymington and asked if I'd like to be managing director of Berthon. He had been 80% absent for 7 years, and I'd noticed that there was no pipeline for the boatyard. I mentioned that to him before I left. Asked for the 24 hours. I asked for 24 hours to contemplate, and when I called back to confirm that I would take charge, I agreed a 50% cut in salary, but I forbade my father from sitting on my shoulder. That was a very, very good choice. As you will know, Karen, who was the PA for a long time. He was quite 20 years. Finally, I asked my father if I should return immediately or finish the regatta. His answer was, you're the MD, you decide. I therefore stayed at the regatta to keep the rule to never let down a team. I'd previously raced dinghies as captain of sailing at Stanford University in Palo Alto, California, where I managed to graduate with 2 separate degrees, one in economics, one in history. For the last 2 years there and onwards, I managed to race 100 days a year worldwide for at least 25 years in ever bigger boats. Dominic, my brother, joined, having decided to leave the life business. He started working in Paris for a consortium of 3 existing businesses, and soon after enjoyed the Royal Lymington dry sailing dinghy on Thursday evenings, having left them behind. First in the J class and through various others, including an X-boat that was used by him. The X-boat was sitting underneath a 100-foot yacht called Providence that had come from the Caribbean and it was on our last slipway that the company had. This was too much information for Mr. HMRC, who had tried to charge it as a benefit in kind. We appealed and won because the apprentices who were learning their craft on the X-boat the previous year were the ones working on board the 100-foot, proven with the timesheets. Dominic also raced in regattas on larger boats up to maxis in the Caribbean and Cambria that belonged to a friend of our father, Dennis Neal, which had sailed from Australia to race in Saint-Tropez in the Mediterranean. Generally, we tried not to be at the same regattas, but sometimes the opportunity was difficult to decline such offers. It also seems quite clear that we both have followed the steps of both David and Harry, and it's fair to say that we've had a full life on the water in order to comprehend our market. I would say that the first few years were a baptism of fire. Just to make that real, we did actually have a minor fire incident, but we also turned the 1 million loss of building Delvina to a meagre profit in the following year, and then we soon managed to get a contract to build a 60-foot pilot boat for a Middle Eastern port authority in Abu Dhabi, which turned into 2 pilot vessels, having me flown over there for 36 hours and back again. Within a few years, we'd upped the apprentices to 30 on average, and they've stayed above 25 in the last 30 years. Berthon then started to fit out the carbon Kevlar 7-class lifeboat hulls and superstructures built by Green Marine, literally on our doorstep for the RNLI. We subsequently built 40 lifeboats for them over 25 years. Refits for blue water cruising boats, sailboats continue as a result of our worldwide sales team, just as Harry built a new shed in 1920 and a new blacksmith shop in 1929. We did the same in 1998, building new sheds based upon time and motion to increase productivity. River walls have been replaced, with more to come, and local businesses were bought in 2018-19 to take the company back to smaller entry levels via BHG, a local business that was quietly for sale. Had we not stepped in, the business might have ended up in the Midlands. BHG is the largest dealer of Yamaha outboard engines in the UK, and we also sell through BHG Torpedo electric outboards, looking forward to sustainability. This subsidiary also stocks a lot of spare parts which we sell direct to other marine commercial businesses and DIY purchases. They sell paddle boards and tenders as well as Jeannot motorboats made in France, but we install the engines, the electronics and the decks. This all sounds akin to Harry's focus to look after entry customers as well as the rich and famous. At the same time, Dominic also brought in Gemini hulls from South Africa, and just 5 years on from starting that, this year we fitted out and sold 20 Gemini ribs. One of those a couple of years ago were sent to AB Ports as a runabout, now that they've got a free port, and Jersey Research and Rescue. The commercial aspect continues with a multi-year contract with AB Ports Southampton and Portsmouth's fleet of 20 pilot and survey and management vessels, which we currently have. We also purchased another small company just before COVID, based here in Lymington, selling patented floating docks under the brand of Versadock that used to be manufactured in the USA and now here in the UK. I didn't really like the idea of transferring air in containers from the USA to sell in the UK. The sustainable benefit is that there is no need for anti-fouling for boats sitting on top of these docks in the marinas, and anodes last for years and years. Furthermore, simple servicing can be carried out without a lift on shore. The defence sector brings in a number of the MOD's P2000 Archer-class training vessels, and we've arranged for one of those to be at Lymington Afloat Festival to recruit cadets into the maritime sector. That was after that we'd noticed that the MOD were advertising on Instagram for an admiral. That was something. They couldn't say no. And the leisure sector includes yacht maintenance and repair, along with wooden boat refit and rebuilds on vessels dating back to the 1930s, 40s and 50s, currently in the sheds. We've also got MGB 81 and the RAF 102 are coming to join us on the festival, and we look after them each year. All wooden still. And I'm very nearly finished. Berthon International Yacht Sales is now a global business, with Berthon USA in Newport, Rhode Island, Berthon Scandinavia in Sweden, and Berthon Spain in Mallorca, offering sales and servicing. These count for around 30 extra people working under the Berthon Group overseas. Our marvellous and very well esteemed sales director is Sue Grant, who took over Berthon International Yacht Sales not long after Dominic and I arrived on the scene. Her thumbprint descriptions of boats for sale have amused readers of the yachting magazines and now online websites for over 30 years. Between us, we became dealers of Norwegian windy sports boats in the UK and France until a couple of years ago when the management there changed. We continued to work closely to sell British branded Pearl motor yachts, and we're also agents for the Italian-built Solaris sailing yachts and motorboats in the UK, Berthon Scandinavia and Berthon USA. Our latest brand we represent is Pegasus, another Italian brand for fast, comfortable cruising, blue water cruising. Finally, we also represent Iguana, this amphibious rib. Berthon always likes the niche markets. In summary, we've nearly doubled the headcount from 1990 to around 200 worldwide, and that's in 35 years. Berthon continues to diversify, evolving with the times, constantly looking forward to what lies next in the marine industry. Investments continue with a new 45-ton boat mover due next year, PVs on M-Shed shortly, and we recently obtained planning permission to repile the marina's river wall starting next autumn in 2025, and other sections later on. Sadly, that brings no extra revenue, and the marina will need to be reconfigured to accommodate the longer and, more importantly, wider modern boats. The latter will reduce berths overall, so we'll soon deposit another application with the New Forest District Council Planning Department for a dry stack to meet demand for entry-level small motorboats under 10 metres, where the Lymington Harbour Commissioners have a 25 to 40-year wait list. There is no other waterfront in the Western Solent that's got the possibility to do that. Yes, despite nearing retirement, I'm now 63, we feel the need to future-proof the business. Luckily, we have no debt, and we've been cash positive for over 30 years. We see ourselves as caretakers. Finally, we use the term Auntie Berthon because we look after our staff. 2 retirements earlier this year celebrated 50 years each at Berthon. Another ex-apprentice, skilled engineer, promoted to engineering foreman, and long been seen as a senior project manager, has just applied to reduce his hours from a 5-day week to a 4-day week. I hope that you've enjoyed my rather long talk, but before we have any questions, Keith Longman will quickly explain our role in the marine and maritime apprenticeship range.
Wow, how do I follow that? But I'll try. Good evening, everyone. I'm now going to talk to you about something that I'm very passionate about, apprenticeships. And Berthon has been employing and training apprentices for more than 100 years. You'll be thankful this evening I'm going to focus on the last 15 of those years, not the whole century, to give you a flavour of our commitment to our young apprentices, why it is so important to enthuse young people about the marine industry and skills-based careers, and the types of activities we have been involved in, both locally and nationally. My background is marine engineering, and without sounding like I'm in an Alcoholic Anonymous meeting, my name is Keith, and I'm an ex-apprentice. As I've already mentioned, we have a very long-standing apprenticeship programme, and our latest graduates will be attending their graduation ceremony at Southampton International Boat Show on the 17th of September. We have a further 20 apprentices at various stages of their 4-year programme with us, specialising in either boat building, we still call them the traditional craft of shipwright, marine engineering, marine electrical and yacht painting. On Monday, a further 8 young people will be starting their apprenticeship with us, and a further one the week after. This commitment to training the next generation is vital to the continued success of our business. Over the last 15 years, Berthon has employed and trained 127 apprentices, spending 8,000 hours each and 1 million hours between them training and honing their skills in their chosen discipline. Collectively, they have undertaken 16,500 off-the-job training days, including City and Guilds qualifications at level 2 and 3. Everything we do at Berthon is designed to develop our apprentices into confident, highly skilled, competent individuals. We have been recognised locally, nationally and internationally for the depth, breadth and quality of our apprenticeship programme, winning 14 awards since 2009. We run a Duke of Edinburgh Gold Award programme for apprentices and currently have a cohort of 6 that are nearing completion. This programme not only teaches them new skills, it also develops them as good citizens. Berthon sponsors this programme, including their expeditions, and apprentices even undertake their volunteering during the working day. Their volunteering was over a 12-month period at the local Lymington Food Bank, New Forest Basics Bank. This experience opened their eyes to other people's circumstances, and they all found it a humbling and extremely satisfying experience, helping those less fortunate than themselves. All our fourth year apprentices have the opportunity to apply for the King's Silver Medal competition, which is run at Kilda Water in Northumberland each September by the Worshipful Company of Shipwrights. Berthon has been fortunate to have had several medal winners over the years. The photographs show two of our apprentices, James and Steph, during their week-long course where they were challenged in a variety of tasks, including orienteering, wild camping and raft building, developing teamwork and leadership skills, as well as getting them way out of their comfort zone. The feedback I receive is always something they will never forget, and so pleased that we've given them the opportunity. Apprentices have had some amazing opportunities afforded by one of our clients who was enthused by our commitment to apprenticeships. On having an FPB 64 Explorer yacht, Grey Wolf, built in New Zealand, he discussed with us the possibility of involving apprentices in his voyage back to the UK. Apprentices applied to join the Four Legs, and following an interview process with myself and the client, 4 were then chosen. We flew the first out to Whangarei on the North Island of New Zealand, where he spent 2 weeks helping complete the vessel ready for the first leg to Tahiti. From there, he was replaced by the second apprentice, with the third joining the boat in Panama, through the canal and onward to Antigua, followed by the fourth who undertook the Atlantic crossing. Further trips followed, up to the Arctic Circle for other apprentices where they encountered orca pods and polar bears. Subsequently, on purchasing a larger FPB 78 Grey Wolf 2, we then had a further conversation about involving our apprentices. Apprentices had the opportunity to explore the coast of Chile, Easter Island and down to Patagonia, and the photos show Dan top right and Steph bottom left on differing legs of the trip. Berthon and Brian's long-standing relationship with St Barb Museum led us to be approached by Emily Jo Gibbs, a renowned textile artist. She had been working on a commission called The Makers, and as part of this, she focused on producing an exhibition at St Barb called The Boat Builders. Emily spent time in the shipyard speaking and photographing Berthon apprentices and the foreman before producing some exquisite and detailed pieces as shown in the photographs, and I expect many of you saw the expedition at the museum. On the theme of St Barb, the working pilot boat wheelhouse, built, painted and kitted out by Berthon apprentices, has been a long-standing display at the museum, complete with working radar. A new display of knot tying is in the process of being completed, ready for the Lymington Afloat exhibition. Our apprentices also play a significant role in assisting me to enthuse the next generation of shipwrights and engineers. We have provided immersive days for schools this year in which the pupils get hands-on experience of the types of equipment and materials our apprentices work with. We have undertaken numerous school assemblies and in June assisted Preston School with their enterprise days, with boat design competitions for each tutor group, with apprentices giving advice on designs and materials, and a Dragon's Den pitch at the end of the day for each class winner to find the overall best design for the year group. We provide numerous work experience placements, and this year alone provided placements for pupils from 10 schools and colleges. We attend numerous careers fairs, and we will be attending Preston School, Southampton International Boat Show, Ballard School, and the Royal Yacht Squadron Cowes careers fairs later this month, to name a few. We have also entertained the St Barb Saturday Club of 13 to 16-year-olds, who all had a great morning carrying out activities, learning about apprenticeships with me, and having a tour of the yard. We have always had a proactive approach to ensure the health and prosperity of our industry. In early 2009, Brian and I met with the then Learning and Skills Council to discuss spearheading an apprenticeship expansion pilot to encourage marine SMEs in the southeast of England to begin or return to training apprentices, which there was a sad demise of. After less than an hour in which we had displayed our passion and vision for apprenticeships, we secured £850,000 of government funding, if only it was that easy these days, for bursaries for first year wages for companies employing their first apprentice. Berthon administered the scheme free of charge and delivered a highly successful programme, 100k under budget. Over the 2-year pilot, 60 apprentices were employed by 15 businesses, as shown in the diagram, with 59 of those 60 apprentices subsequently completing their apprenticeship. So the very, very high 90%, when the average for apprenticeship completions at the time was around about 65%, if not lower. I'm now going to speak to you of our involvement with the Worshipful Company of Shipwrights. Brian and I are both liverymen of the Shipwrights, which is one of the oldest livery companies in the City of London. Brian had the foresight to persuade the Shipwrights Company to mirror the successful apprenticeship expansion pilot we had run for government and provide bursaries for marine SMEs new to apprenticeships. The bursaries covered the first year wage of each new apprentice, and so the Shipwrights apprenticeship scheme was born. Brian and I ran and administered this programme for 2 years from 2012 to 2014, at which point Brian and the scheme committee gained £600,000 of additional funding from Lloyd's Registry Foundation to expand the scheme and also to employ a full-time scheme manager. I continued to mentor businesses and subsequently joined the committee myself up until its conclusion at the end of 2022. In all, over £1 million was invested in 104 maritime SMEs, employing 122 apprentices. Therefore, the scheme was a natural extension of the company's objective to aid the career development of young people. This training ethos harks back to the origins of the Shipwrights Company and its original purpose. The map shows the spread of businesses we supported from Scotland, the Isle of Man, the East Coast, South Coast, and down into Devon and Cornwall. In total, over the last 15 years, we have raised approximately £2 million to support marine apprenticeships in SMEs. The Shipwrights also conduct an annual lectures programme at Mast Mayflower Studios in Southampton, and I sit on the committee who will organise these free-to-attend annual events which attract and inspire up to 300 apprentices, students, graduates and the next generation of shipwrights each year. In 2022, I was invited to join the UK Shipbuilding Skills Task Force that was formed by the National Shipbuilding Office and Department for Education with the aim of identifying and addressing the skills shortages in our industry as set out in the National Shipbuilding Strategy. The four-nation approach consisted of industry experts, academia, trade unions and government representatives producing a report with 6 recommendations to government. The first which was for a delivery group to be formed to drive the recommendations forward, which has now been formed. And it would be very interesting to see that they push forward up those recommendations. Additionally, I led on the production of a toolkit for employers, how to leverage the UK skills system, which was extremely well received by ministers. For the last 10 years, I've been chair of the employer groups that have built the new apprenticeship standards for boat building, marine engineering and marine electrical, working closely with the Institute of Apprenticeships and Technical Education and all stakeholders to ensure our apprenticeships are fit for purpose. We have recently completed a review of the boat building standard and is now awaiting ministerial approval, and the review of marine engineering will start next month. As part of the apprenticeship development, I have acted as a consultant for City and Guilds for a number of years, updating delivery and assessment materials for Level 2 and Level 3 qualifications. In 2018, I was awarded honorary membership of the Guild for my work. We have also worked very closely with British Marine over a number of years to encourage their focus towards apprenticeships, including working with the Shipwrights Apprenticeship Scheme Manager to promote the future workforce of our industry. In 2012, as chair of the British Marine Training Committee, I instigated the first British Marine apprenticeship graduations at London Boat Show. Now with a home at Southampton Boat Show, the graduations are in their 12th year this year. I also work with Engineerity, who are a charity focused on promoting engineering and manufacturing, and were formed after the demise of the Sector Skills Councils. I chair their SME advisory group, which lobby government regarding skills and training delivery. Brian and myself are also apprentice ambassadors and have been for a number of years. Brian chaired the South East Network and was awarded the title of Honorary Apprentice Advocate. Both myself and Brian's brother, Dominic, are careers enterprise advisors for local schools. I work with Preston School and Dominic works with New Forest Academy on the water side. Our roles are to support the schools with careers advice and ensure that the schools are hitting the requirements of the 8 Gatsby benchmarks, which assess the development of their pupils in employability skills. Some of the things we do have been shown in previous slides, such as supporting enterprise days and providing immersive days at the shipyard. We have also worked on a number of initiatives with Maritime UK Solent and Solent Partners, the latest of which is the development of a skills boot camp for marine electricians to help plug that particular skills gap. This last slide showcases some of the incredible statistics attributed to Berthon regarding the enduring legacy, which is our commitment to apprenticeships and skills. Over a century of training apprentices, 127 apprentices, 16,500 training days, and a total of 1 million training hours over the last 15 years, meaning our apprentices are the highest skilled in the industry. Incidentally, 2 of my apprentices that I trained when I was engineering foreman are now running the department themselves, so that makes me very proud as well. Our existing 20 apprentices will be joined by a new cohort on Monday morning as they start their careers with us, and I will be excited to see how they develop over the next 4 years. I'm sure Harry May, Brian's other ancestors, the Reverend Berthon, and the other custodians of Lymington Shipyard through the centuries would be rightly proud of our continued success. Thank you for listening, and we'll be happy to take any questions.
Too much information. Oh, there's one there.
Thank you. From Lymington-based businesses, what's the sort of general balance of your, say, turnover between the marina activities and the boat yard activities?
Well, the marina is actually only 10% of our revenue. We're over 20 million a year. We've got 165 people being paid, and we always used to say we've got 165 mortgages to pay. So it's very unusual to have a vertically integrated business in any sector, but we have proved for over 100 years that we are still vertically integrated. You can buy a paddleboard, you can buy a screw, and you can buy a super yacht, and that's where we go. And we're not just picking out the best of the top of the businesses, and it somehow or other it keeps going. It keeps going, and it's lovely to do. We keep having to move with the times. We have to change what boats we sell and how we sell them, how we build them, how we service them, how we pull them out of the water, as you've heard earlier on. And that's the bit. The biggest problem that we've got is that I spend 60% of my time on red tape. How can you run proper business if you're doing that? There is a real big problem in the Western world.
Hi. Is there a shift in the demographic of the people who use the marina, for example? In other words, are they getting younger? Are they getting older? Are the new boat buyers young people, old people, etc.?
Well, before COVID, we were all getting very worried that people were absorbing into their telephones and everything was being rented. And actually, COVID did a very, very good thing for our business. And bear in mind also Boris. He was the first one to turn around and said, right, you've got a bubble in your house, you've got a bubble in your car, and you can have a bubble on your boat. And so we did that, and we allowed our marina to open very quickly. I also then thought of a very good idea, which happened, of having a concert. Because everybody came, they sat on their boat, and we put big speakers up, and no one was on the shore, and they were all on their boat. It also helped because they paid for their own food and their beer and everything else. But we did three of those a year. But what happened during COVID was that you found the grandparents, because before COVID, families were becoming dispersed. And we noticed that actually COVID brought families back together again. So we had parents who were absolutely up to here with having their children, and so they very quickly and fastly in the holidays passed them on to the parents, the grandparents, who were delighted to have them because they couldn't do anything else. And then suddenly they would take them out and the phones disappeared. They didn't listen anymore. They were on the boat and enjoying it, and then they could bring their friends. Then, after COVID, some of the grey-haired people, as it were, where all the money is, started buying bigger boats rather than going down to smaller boats, which is what they would naturally do, because they wanted not just the grandchildren, they wanted the children and the grandchildren all on the boat at the same time. And also, there was this thing about walks. You could go for walking, and people got into outside sports. So there's a lot of people nowadays doing paddleboarding and stuff like that, getting out at it. And there's a whole lot of well-being going on as well, which we foster as well. So that you get out to the sea and you're in this place. You're not going down a route like a technology company will sell to you, or your phone will do it. You can't sort of find what you want. On the sea, you're out there and you've got this huge amount of area in front of you. And as long as you're careful, get out there and enjoy it. So we also wondered whether they would want to charter more boats, and there are boat clubs that are coming, which is great. There are a lot of boat clubs, and small boats and big ones, and they've got different ideas. But again, we don't do charter, and we wouldn't want to get involved with that. We just want to do the bits that are easier than that. So from that perspective, Sue always used to say, you know, everyone wants to get on a plane and go somewhere warm, but also they want to play golf, they want to do this, they want to do that. It's actually narrowed now, and I think people have focused that families are important much more than they were 5-10 years ago.
Sorry, one more.
That's all right.
The Lymington Afloat, this initiative has revealed what the people involved in the industry would know, the extraordinary diversity of marine-related businesses in this area. How important are those links to you? Do you buy much from them? Do you use their expertise? How does it work?
Well, naturally, the South Coast is the biggest maritime area in the country. In terms of amounts of small businesses and everything else, and we're not building aircraft carriers, but we've got on site the aircraft passenger vessels are going back and forward, we find that this cluster here is very important, and so Keith and I have spent 20 years, working with the LEP. They keep changing these names. It's now something else, isn't it? Solent Partners. And it's very important, and I mentioned it earlier on, that the cluster grows, and we've been talking about it. We've got the yacht clubs behind us, we've got the shipwright company behind us. You know, it's ridiculous that our courses that the academics were doing for the apprenticeships, we had a spray shed 40 years ago, and yet you only got spray painting as part of an apprenticeship course last year. I mean, it's ridiculous. And where we are trying to compete with the Germans, the Swiss, the Swedish, you can't do that unless we teach people what to do. And it's very important to teach the younger generations. And so, you know, we try our hardest, but it's a big ladder to climb.
You know, through the apprenticeship program, we have brought skills competitors, business competitors, skills and business competitors together amongst the industry. So we're all working together, both large and small businesses, on that side of things. That is a really good conduit. As far as the diversity of business and things like that, you know, the supply chain is really important, and we try to use local businesses as well across the business, not just on our boat building, but also our facilities, our maintenance of our site, etc. And it's something that Brian has always been very keen on, is to support local businesses where we can.
But it was, and when we got the money from Gordon Brown, he suddenly sort of remembered that apprenticeships might be a good idea, even though he wanted everyone to go to university. The way I explained it, which was straightforward, was we are there helping our competitors. Because if we don't help our competitors, it's not going to help us. Because we need them to keep going. We need Oyster to keep going, so that when they sell their boats, new boats on, there's got to be sold them second hand. Well, we can do that very well, and we can do the refit. They don't want to do the refit. So, you know, you've got to take that sort of perspective. And how do you do it? You go to the bottom and you work out how to do it the best way possible. They weren't having any apprentices on, and they started Discovery as well. They had no apprentices, and then they took on 5 or 6 a year. But you have to prove it, because the first year of your apprentice, you're losing about £12,500 a year.
The cash negative, and then they don't become cash neutral until year 2, and then year 3 and 4, that's when you start to get that return on investment.
Yeah, you probably make a gross profit of 35 to 40,000 in year 3. That's when most people finish their apprentice course. But we actually have a 4-year course, because we're having to diagnose, come up with a solution, and then execute. But if you're building a boat like Sunseeker, you don't do that. You're coming into work to do the same thing every day.
It's interesting, the large manufacturers are starting to switch from between, you know, in our business, we only employ fully skilled people, and you know, obviously our apprentices come fully skilled people. Manufacturers, Princess, have already gone through this program of switching from having 80% skilled to 20% semi-skilled to 80% semi-skilled, 20% skilled. And Sunseeker are just starting to go through that process. So they've started a just add water instant boat builder. So they've got this 12-week program. They get lots of people in, get them on the line, because that's the type of skill level that they need. For a business like ours, that doesn't work. We need those high skills, hence that million hours of training over the last 15 years. And that's why our apprentices are sought after in every other business.
So we took a view to employ double the amount of apprentices that we might want at the end of their program, because it's a 4-year contract, but then we give them a new contract if we want to keep them. At the moment, we've got 100% that they last through the whole process, and also we're giving 100% for them to stick around, and they're wanting to stick around. It's obviously, there's a recession around and stuff like that, so people don't move as much. But I think we're giving them more of a wide industry view than if you're on a production line. So ours don't want to go and be on a production line, as Keith said, but that's not too bad. And not a lot of boat companies. During the time we were building the lifeboats, the RNLI lost basically every other company that had been working with them, bar 3 or 4. And there's only 4 left out of 30 companies that they used. So it's there are not a lot of them around. One more question, anybody? No?
If there are no more questions, then I think we would like to thank you both so much. This has been a really fascinating discussion, and I hope that everyone will come and see the exhibition. There is nowhere near as much information as Brian has given us, which sort of means to me, and I was saying this to somebody earlier, that probably means that there needs to be a Berthon exhibition in another couple of years. But we'll go into negotiation about that a little bit later. But if you'd like to join me in
we
saying
do yard tours every day. And it doesn't matter whether they're from overseas or anywhere, we do it. We had a Porsche club last week.
Right, if you'd like to